Guess who's secretly a millionaire? That's all it took. 6 words from Jillian's mouth, and suddenly every head in the conference room swiveled toward me. I felt the blood drain from my face as my stomach dropped through the floor. Have you ever had that nightmare where you're standing in front of a crowd completely naked? This was worse. This was my financial nakedness, exposed without my consent, in front of 14 coworkers who, until that precise moment, had viewed me as their equal. I still remember the exact smell of the room, coffee, dry erase markers, and the distinct scent of someone's morning protein bar peanut butter, I think. Details you notice when your world is imploding. I'm Tessa, by the way, 34, content strategist at Brightline Media, caffeine-dependent, and, until that Monday morning, just another underpaid creative scraping by in Seattle. Not a trust fund baby, not someone born into money, just a woman who'd spent 12 years building a career while eating ramen more nights than I care to admit. Wait, before I get too deep into this, please like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. This story took me 2 years to be ready to tell, and knowing I'm not just screaming into the void would help more than you know. Okay, back to the conference room from hell. Lawrence, our director, was mid-sentence about Q3 projections when Jillian interrupted with her little bomb. I watched his face transition from annoyed at the interruption to confused to something else entirely as he processed what she'd said. His eyes narrowed slightly as they locked onto me. Jillian, he said, his tone deceptively calm, perhaps we should focus on the agenda. But she wasn't done. She never knew when to stop. It was her defining characteristic. No, seriously, she continued, holding up a piece of paper I instantly recognized. My great-aunt Claudia's lawyer's letterhead. Tessa here is sitting on a $9.1 million inheritance. Just found out about it last week. Can you believe she's still showing up to work? The silence that followed was absolute. 14 pairs of eyes, all fixed on me, all recalibrating who I was in real time. Let me back up for a second. Jillian Hooper and I had been hired the same month, 4 years earlier. Same position, same pay grade. But from day one, she treated every interaction like we were competing for the last oxygen tank on a sinking ship. Every client win, every compliment from management, every successful campaign became ammunition in a war I never signed up for. And here's the worst part. I was good at my job, really good. While Jillian networked and self-promoted and took credit, I just delivered. Consistently. Clients requested me by name. My campaigns won industry awards. But Jillian had a gift for positioning herself in the spotlight. And for some inexplicable reason, Lawrence seemed charmed by her. That's private correspondence, I finally managed to say, my voice embarrassingly small. Jillian's smile widened. Well, not if you leave it in the printer for anyone to find. I had printed it, Friday afternoon just before leaving. One personal document after weeks of only seeing this life-changing news on my phone screen. I needed to hold it, to make it real. And then, I got a call from our biggest client as I was packing up. 20 minutes later, I hurried out, completely forgetting about the letter. That's quite enough, Lawrence said, standing up. But the damage was done. I could see it in everyone's faces. The recalculations, the assumptions, the questions. Ricardo from design, who'd split pizza with me countless times when we both worked late, now looked at me like I'd been lying to him. Bailey from social media, who'd cried on my shoulder when her dad got sick and she couldn't afford to fly home, was staring at her notebook, refusing to meet my eyes. And Lawrence. Lawrence's expression was the most disturbing, thoughtful, assessing, like he was seeing an entirely different person sitting in my chair. Tessa, Jillian, my office after this meeting, he said quietly. Then, with forced enthusiasm, now, as I was saying about our Q3 projections. But nobody was listening anymore. The meeting limped along for another 20 painful minutes while I sat there, feeling naked and exposed and furious. My hands shook so badly, I had to shove them under my thighs. It wasn't just about the money. It was about privacy, about consent, about the fact that something deeply personal, something I was still processing myself, had been weaponized against me without my permission. See, here's what Jillian didn't bother to learn before broadcasting my business. I barely knew great Aunt Claudia. She was my mother's estranged aunt who lived in Maine. We met exactly twice in my lifetime. The inheritance wasn't even finalized. The letter was just the initial notification from her estate lawyer. And I was still reeling from the shock of it all. Still grieving a woman I should have known better. Still drowning in guilt that my first reaction had been relief rather than sorrow. The meeting finally ended. People filed out, some deliberately avoiding eye contact, others staring a little too long. I remained seated, knuckles white around my notebook, waiting for the room to clear. Jillian lingered, straightening papers with a self-satisfied smirk. I could feel her waiting for me to break down, to cause a scene. I didn't give her the satisfaction. My mother, perpetually broke but stubbornly dignified, had taught me better than that. When everyone else was gone, I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and looked directly at her. "You had no right," I said quietly. She shrugged. "If you wanted to keep it private, you shouldn't have printed it at work. You read my personal mail, Jillian, then shared it without my consent. In what universe is that okay?" She laughed, actually laughed, and gathered her things. "Oh, come on, don't be so dramatic. Everyone was going to find out eventually when you quit to go live your luxury life." "That's not," I started, but she was already walking out. "Lawrence is waiting," she called over her shoulder. I took a moment to breathe, to push down the rage that threatened to choke me. Then I followed her to Lawrence's office. His assistant gave me a pitying look as I passed. Great. News travels fast. Lawrence's office had always intimidated me, all glass and chrome and expensive art pieces he'd pretend to understand if asked. He was seated behind his massive desk, Jillian already comfortably arranged in one of the visitor chairs, legs crossed, completely at ease. "Close the door, Tessa," he said. I did, then took the remaining seat, spine straight, chin up. Dignity, I reminded myself. Always dignity. "So," Lawrence began, steepling his fingers, "this is unexpected." "Lawrence, Let me finish," he cut me off. "I want to address the immediate issue first. Jillian, while your discovery is interesting, going through someone else's printed materials is inappropriate and potentially a violation of company policy." A flicker of surprise crossed Jillian's face. She hadn't expected even this mild rebuke. "I didn't go through anything," she protested. "It was sitting right there in the printer tray. Anyone could have seen it." Lawrence nodded thoughtfully. "Regardless, sharing personal information about a colleague in a team meeting shows poor judgment." I felt a momentary surge of vindication, which evaporated with his next words. "That said, Tessa, this does raise some questions about your continued employment here." My jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" "Well," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you have to admit this changes things. If you're coming into this kind of money, I imagine your priorities will shift." "My priorities haven't changed at all," I said firmly. "And frankly, my personal finances are none of the company's business." Jillian snorted softly. Lawrence ignored her. Of course. But from a practical standpoint, we need to consider the team dynamics. People who are financially secure often lack the hunger that drives innovation." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you suggesting I'd be less committed to my work because of this inheritance? That's ridiculous. I haven't even received any money yet." "The letter was just a notification." "Nevertheless," Lawrence continued, "perception matters. The team may question your commitment now. The only reason they'd question anything is because Jillian deliberately created this situation," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. Lawrence held up a placating hand. "Let's not assign blame. What's done is done. Now we need to think about next steps." That's when I noticed he kept glancing at his computer screen. An email had come in during our conversation, and whatever it contained seemed to be influencing his thoughts. "What next steps?" I asked, a sense of dread building. Lawrence cleared his throat. "I've just heard from HR. They've suggested we place you on paid administrative leave while we sort this out." "Administrative leave?" I echoed, disbelieving. "For what possible reason?" It's standard procedure when there's a significant change in an employee's circumstances that might affect their role. That's absolutely not standard procedure, I countered, heat rising to my face. There's nothing in the employee handbook about placing someone on leave because they might receive an inheritance. Jillian was watching this exchange like it was her favorite show, barely concealing her delight. Tessa, Lawrence said, his tone now patronizing, you have to understand how this looks. You've been working here for years, accepting a salary that, let's be honest, is below market rate for someone with your talents. Now we learn you're about to become a multimillionaire. It raises questions about your motivations. I stared at him, dumbfounded. My motivations? I've given everything to this company. Nights, weekends, holidays. I've never once complained about my salary, which, by the way, is the exact same as Jillian's, despite my consistently higher performance metrics. Lawrence had the decency to look uncomfortable at that. Jillian's smile faltered. That's not the point, he said. Then what is the point? I demanded. Because it sounds like I'm being punished for something completely outside my control. Lawrence sighed dramatically. No one is punishing you, Tessa. We're simply taking reasonable precautions. HR is concerned about potential liability if you access sensitive client information while planning your exit. My exit? I was nearly shouting now. I haven't said anything about leaving. It's inevitable, though, isn't it? Jillian interjected smoothly. Let's be real. None of us would keep showing up to this place if we had $9 million. I turned to her, no longer bothering to hide my contempt. That says more about you than it does about me, Jillian. Lawrence stood up. I think we're getting off track here. Tessa, I've made my decision. You'll be on paid leave for 2 weeks while HR conducts a review. Please gather your personal items and check in with security on your way out. Security? I repeated, my voice hollow. Standard procedure, he said again. His new favorite phrase, apparently. I sat there, stunned, as the full impact of what was happening washed over me. After 4 years of exemplary work, I was being escorted out like a criminal, all because of a piece of paper I never should have printed at work, and a jealous colleague who couldn't mind her own business. This is wrong, I said quietly. And you know it. Lawrence wouldn't meet my eyes. Your keycard access will be temporarily suspended. Chelsea will contact you with further instructions. I stood up slowly, dignity the only thing I had left to cling to. You'll be hearing from my attorney. It was a bluff. I didn't have an attorney. But the words had the desired effect. Lawrence's expression flickered with uncertainty. There's no need to escalate this, Tessa. It's a temporary measure. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked out of his office with my head high, past the curious stares of my colleagues, to my desk. A security guard, Dave, who I'd greeted every morning for 4 years, stood awkwardly nearby. I'm sorry about this, Tess, he mumbled as I gathered my photos, my spare cardigan, the small plant I'd kept alive since my first week. Not your fault, Dave, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Jillian appeared, leaning against the wall of my cubicle. Need help carrying anything? She asked sweetly. I looked up at her, this woman who'd just destroyed my professional reputation out of pure spite. Something inside me hardened in that moment, a resolve I didn't know I possessed. You know what the difference is between us, Jillian, I said quietly, so only she could hear. You saw that letter and immediately thought about how to use it against me. I would never do that to you. Not in a million years. Her smile faltered slightly. That's because you're weak, she replied, but there was a hint of defensiveness in her tone. I finished packing my things into a cardboard box that someone, probably Chelsea from HR, had thoughtfully provided. As Dave escorted me toward the elevator, I could feel everyone watching. 4 years of relationships, collaborations, shared victories, all now tainted by the perception that I'd been deceiving them somehow. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, turning to face my now former colleagues. Jillian stood at the front, arms crossed, victorious. Lawrence hung back by his office door, already on his phone. Bailey was crying silently at her desk. Ricardo looked confused and betrayed. As the doors began to close, I made a split-second decision. I set down my box, stuck my hand out to hold the elevator, and spoke clearly, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Just so you all know, my great-aunt Claudia died 3 weeks ago. I met her twice in my life. Once when I was 7, once when I was 22. I had no idea she had money. No idea she even knew I existed. I'm still in shock. Still grieving someone I should have known better. Still processing all of this. I didn't tell anyone because I'm still coming to terms with it myself. But sure, go ahead and decide what kind of person I am based on a piece of private correspondence that should never have been shared. The office was completely silent. Also, I added, picking up my box again, whoever took the last coffee without starting a new pot every single day for the past year? It was Jillian. She admitted it to me months ago and laughed about how everyone blamed the interns. The elevator doors closed on Jillian's outraged face, and I finally allowed the tears to come as I descended to the lobby, escorted by a sympathetic security guard, unemployed for the first time in my adult life. I had no idea what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The first thing I did after getting escorted out of the building was sit in my car and scream. Like full-on primal scream. Windows up, face buried in my jacket to muffle the sound, but still. I screamed until my throat hurt, until the security guard patrolling the parking lot gave me a concerned look, until the pressure in my chest loosened just enough that I could breathe again. Then I called my mom. They did what? She was furious in that quiet, intense way that's scarier than yelling. Based on a letter they had no right to read? Baby, that's not legal. That's not even close to legal. I don't know, Mom, I sighed, pulling out of the parking lot for what might be the last time. The HR handbook probably has some vague language they can twist to justify it. Doesn't matter what their handbook says. They can't discriminate against you because you might come into money. That's financial discrimination or something. I almost smiled at her improvised legal terminology. My mom had raised me alone after my dad split when I was 4. She'd worked 3 jobs sometimes, always just keeping us afloat, never quite drowning but never really swimming either. She knew about unfairness in ways most people couldn't imagine. I'll figure it out, I promised her. How are you feeling today? Did the new medication help with the pain? See, here's something else Jillian didn't know when she decided to broadcast my business. My mom had been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis 2 years earlier, the really aggressive kind. She'd had to stop working, and her medical bills were, well, let's just say that inheritance letter wasn't just surprising. It was a literal answer to prayers I'd stopped believing would be answered. I didn't go straight home after leaving Brightline. I couldn't face my empty apartment, the walls still covered in sticky notes for projects I was no longer responsible for. Instead, I drove to Puget Sound and parked where I could see the water. Rain streaked my windshield, because of course it was raining. Seattle doesn't believe in giving you emotional space when you're having a crisis. I called Great-Aunt Claudia's attorney, a gentle-voiced man named Stephen who sounded perpetually surprised, like everything that happened was just slightly more interesting than he'd anticipated. Ms. Harlow, yes, hello, he said when I identified myself. I was planning to call you tomorrow with an update. The paperwork is progressing smoothly. That's good, I said, watching ferry boats in the distance. But I actually have a somewhat urgent question. The letter you sent me, is the amount definite? Is it really going to be 9.1 million? Well, he said, papers shuffling in the background. That's the estimated value of the estate after taxes. There might be slight variations depending on the real estate appraisals and market fluctuations of her investment portfolio. But yes, that figure is reasonably accurate. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. And how long before funds are dispersed? He supplied helpfully. Given the straightforward nature of Ms. Claudia's will and the lack of contestation from other parties, I would estimate 3 to 4 months for the bulk of liquid assets. The property transfers might take slightly longer. 3 to 4 months. I had emergency savings to cover maybe 6 weeks of expenses, maximum. Is there any way to expedite? I started, then stopped myself. Never mind, thank you for the information. After hanging up, I just sat there, watching raindrops race each other down my windshield, feeling oddly detached from reality. $9 million. An amount of money so large my brain couldn't really process it. Money that would change everything eventually. But not today. Today, I was just a woman who'd been publicly humiliated and lost her job for no good reason. I gave myself exactly 1 hour to feel sorry for myself. Then I started my car and drove to the public library. You want to know the first thing I researched? Not how to spend millions or best luxury vacations. I looked up Washington state employment law, wrongful termination, privacy rights in the workplace. 3 hours later, I had filled a notebook with information and formed the beginning of a plan. Not for revenge, exactly, I'm not naturally vindictive, but for justice, for consequences. By the time I got home that evening, I'd scheduled consultations with 2 employment attorneys for the following day. I'd also applied for 4 jobs at competing agencies, updated my LinkedIn profile, and ordered Thai food because sometimes self-care looks like pad see ew and mango sticky rice. That night, I finally let myself read the comments on the post I'd made earlier. A vague, "Some people really show their true colors when they think you have something they want," that had garnered sympathy reactions from friends who had no idea what had actually happened. I couldn't tell the whole story yet, not while I was exploring legal options, but I needed people to know I was okay, that I wasn't defeated. The next morning, I woke up with purpose and a massive tension headache, but that's beside the point. My first attorney consultation was eye-opening. Lisa Chen, a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense attitude, listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally making notes. "They really escorted you out with security?" she asked when I finished. "Based on a personal letter someone else read without permission?" I nodded. "And you have documentation of your performance reviews? The awards you mentioned?" "Everything," I confirmed. 4 years of exemplary reviews, client testimonials, industry recognition. She tapped her pen against her legal pad. "Ms. Harlow, I don't typically say this in initial consultations, but you have a strong case for wrongful termination and invasion of privacy. The fact that they placed you on administrative leave rather than firing you outright suggests they know they're on shaky ground legally." Hope flickered in my chest. "So you think I should fight this?" "I think we should start by sending a strongly worded letter outlining the potential claims and requesting a meeting. Companies like Brightline typically want to avoid negative publicity, especially in cases with clear merit, but you should be prepared for them to dig in their heels initially." I left her office with a contract signed and a strange sense of calm. For the first time since Jillian had held up that letter, I felt like I was regaining control. The second attorney said essentially the same thing, though he emphasized the potential for a substantial settlement if we pushed hard enough. I decided to go with Lisa. Something about her measured approach felt right for what I wanted to accomplish. 2 days later, Lawrence called me. His voice had that forced casualness that people use when they're trying to manipulate you. "Tessa, how are you? I was just checking in to see how you're doing with this little break." I sat up straighter even though he couldn't see me. "I'm doing fine, Lawrence. Just consulting with my employment attorney about next steps." The silence that followed was deeply satisfying. "Attorney?" he finally said. "Tessa, that seems extreme. This is just a standard HR procedure while we sort things out." "Is it standard procedure to escort a top-performing employee out of the building based on private financial information that was obtained and shared without consent?" "Because my attorney finds that particular standard questionable." Another pause. "Look, I think we may have reacted hastily. Why don't you come in tomorrow and we can discuss your return?" "I'll discuss my return with you after I receive the formal apology that Lisa will be outlining in her letter to Brightline's legal department this afternoon. And after we address the hostile work environment created by Jillian's actions." I could practically hear him squirming. "Hostile work environment is a very specific legal term, Tessa. I'm not sure that—" "Like I said, Lawrence, I'll let my attorney handle the specifics. Enjoy your afternoon." I hung up feeling a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. I'd never spoken to him like that before, never really stood up for myself in that way. It was empowering. Meanwhile, I had 2 job interviews scheduled, one with Redshift, Brightline's direct competitor, and another with Cascade Creative, a smaller agency but one with an excellent reputation. The Redshift interview went well, They were clearly excited by my portfolio and experience. But something about their culture reminded me too much of Brightline. Too corporate, too focused on appearances. Cascade was different. Their creative director, Nadia, had purple hair and talked openly about their commitment to work-life balance. When I mentioned I'd left my previous position due to ethical concerns about leadership, she nodded thoughtfully. The industry is too small for bad behavior to stay hidden long, she said. We've heard things about Brightline. Nothing specific, but enough to make us cautious about their leadership style. I almost told her the whole story right then, but instead, I focused on demonstrating what I could bring to their team. By the end of the interview, we were brainstorming campaign ideas for one of their clients, and Nadia was looking at me like I was exactly what they needed. 2 days later, they offered me the position, with a 15% salary increase over what I'd been making at Brightline. The same day, Lisa's letter reached Brightline's legal department. She'd advised me that it would likely take at least a week to hear back, possibly longer if they decided to be difficult. They responded in less than 48 hours. They want to meet, Lisa told me over the phone, their in-house counsel and HR director. Tomorrow, if possible. That's fast, I said, surprised. It suggests they recognize their vulnerability in this situation. I've reviewed their company policies thoroughly. There's nothing that justifies their actions. Additionally, Washington has strong privacy protection laws that likely were violated when your colleague accessed and shared your personal correspondence. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. the following day. I spent that evening choosing my outfit carefully. Not the power suit you might expect, but a simple black dress that had always made me feel confident. Professional, but not trying too hard. I wanted to look like someone who knew her worth. I met Lisa outside Brightline's offices the next morning. She looked exactly like what you'd want in an attorney fighting for you, composed, impeccably dressed, with a quiet competence that made you believe everything would be okay. Remember, she said as we rode the elevator, let me do most of the talking. If they ask you direct questions, keep your answers brief and factual. No emotions, no accusations. I nodded, my stomach in knots. We were shown to a conference room I'd never been in before. Apparently, there was an executive level I hadn't had access to. Lawrence was there, looking uncomfortable, along with a woman I recognized as the head of HR, and a serious-looking man who introduced himself as Daniel Reeves, General Counsel. No, Jillian, I noticed. Interesting. Thank you for coming in today, Miss Harlow. Daniel began after introductions were complete. We've reviewed the concerns raised in your attorney's letter and want to address them directly. Lisa smiled pleasantly. We appreciate your prompt response. My client has suffered significant professional and personal distress due to the actions taken by Brightline. Daniel nodded. We understand that, and we're prepared to offer a solution that we hope will resolve this matter satisfactorily for all parties. He slid a document across the table. Lisa picked it up, reviewed it briefly, then passed it to me. It was a return-to-work agreement with several key points. Immediate reinstatement to my position, removal of any reference to administrative leave from my personnel file, a formal written apology, and this part made me blink twice to make sure I was reading it correctly. A $50,000 retention bonus in recognition of my valuable contributions to the company. It was more than I'd expected, much more, but something felt off. Lisa must have sensed my hesitation. We'll need to review this document thoroughly before my client can consider it. Are there any additional terms not outlined here? Lawrence cleared his throat. We would expect discretion regarding this matter, of course. No discussion of the terms with other employees or on social media. Ah, there it was. They wanted my silence. And what about Jillian Hooper? I asked, ignoring Lisa's small head shake. What consequences has she faced for accessing and sharing my private correspondence? The HR director spoke for the first time. Personnel matters regarding other employees are confidential, Ms. Harlow. So I'm expected to return to work alongside someone who deliberately violated my privacy and created this entire situation, with no assurance that she's been held accountable? Lawrence shifted uncomfortably. We've addressed the matter with Jillian appropriately. Which means what exactly? I pressed. Daniel intervened smoothly. We understand your concern, Ms. Harlow. While we can't discuss specific disciplinary actions, I can assure you that Brightline takes violations of privacy very seriously. Lisa touched my arm gently, a reminder to let her handle this. My client's concern is valid, she said. Returning to a work environment where such a violation occurred, potentially without adequate consequences or safeguards against future incidents, could constitute a continuing hostile work environment. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. What would make your client comfortable returning to Brightline? Lisa looked at me. This was my moment to decide what justice looked like. I took a deep breath. I want 3 things. First, I want Jillian transferred to a different department, preferably one where she has no access to my work or my clients. Second, I want a written acknowledgement from the company that my administrative leave was unwarranted and based on information obtained inappropriately. And third, I want a company-wide review of privacy policies with updated training for all employees. The 3 Brightline representatives exchanged glances. Lawrence looked like he wanted to object, but Daniel gave a small nod. Those terms seem reasonable, Daniel said carefully. We'll need to discuss the logistics of the department transfer, but the other items should be straightforward. Lisa smiled. Excellent. We'll review your offer with these additional terms and respond by tomorrow. As we stood to leave, I had one more question. Just out of curiosity, why did you respond so quickly to our letter? Most companies would drag this out, wouldn't they? Daniel hesitated, but Lawrence answered, his voice tight. Jillian apparently has a history of similar behavior at her previous employer. Something that didn't come up in her background check but emerged during our investigation of this incident. So they knew they'd enabled someone with a pattern of problematic behavior. No wonder they were eager to settle. Outside in the hallway, Lisa gave me an approving look. Well done in there. Very reasonable requests that put the focus on systemic issues rather than personal grievances. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in days. I just want things to be fair. Fair is good, she agreed. But don't forget, they offered you $50,000 because they know they're vulnerable. We should probably ask for $75,000 in our counter. We settled on $65,000, which Brightline accepted without pushback. The agreement was finalized the next day, with all my conditions met. Jillian would be transferred to their satellite office in Tacoma, a significant commute from her Seattle apartment. The company would issue a statement acknowledging the improper handling of my leave. And a privacy training program would be developed and implemented within 60 days. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt conflicted. The night before I was scheduled to return to Brightline, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city lights and thinking about what I really wanted. $9 million was coming my way. Not tomorrow, not next week, but soon enough. Money that would change everything, including what I needed from a job. I thought about Cascade Creative, about Nadia's purple hair and genuine excitement when we'd brainstorm together, about the smaller team where everyone's contribution would matter. And I thought about returning to Brightline, about the sideways glances I'd get, the whispers, the knowledge that I'd only be there because I'd forced them to take me back. I made my decision while watching a ferry cross Elliott Bay, its lights bright against the darkening water. The next morning, I called Lisa and told her my plan. She advised me on the legal implications, helped me draft the necessary documents, and by noon, I had a new course of action. I walked into Brightline at exactly 9:00 a.m. the following day. People stared as I made my way to my old desk, which had remained untouched during my absence. Lawrence immediately appeared, all forced smiles and awkward welcome backs. Tessa, wonderful to have you back. The team has missed you. I smiled politely. Thank you, Lawrence. I'd like to speak with you privately before I get settled if you have a moment. In his office, I handed him an envelope. This is my 2 weeks' notice. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, confusion, calculation, and finally, wariness. I don't understand. We just reached an agreement. The retention bonus. I'll be declining the bonus, I said calmly. I've accepted a position with Cascade Creative that better aligns with my professional goals. But the settlement, the non-monetary terms of our agreement still stand. I clarified. Jillian's transfer, the privacy policy review, the acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Those weren't about money for me. They were about accountability. He stared at me, completely thrown off balance. You're giving up $65,000 to work for a smaller agency? That makes no sense, Tessa. I smiled. It makes perfect sense to me. And since we're being honest with each other, I should tell you that I've decided to use part of my inheritance, which, yes, is real too, establish a scholarship fund for women in creative fields. Specifically, for women who've experienced workplace harassment or discrimination. His eyes widened slightly. The first recipient has already been selected, I continued. Bailey Matthews, who I believe still works in your social media department. She's been wanting to complete her master's degree but couldn't afford it. Now she can, and she won't have to stay in a toxic environment to do it. I stood up, smoothing my dress. I'll complete my 2 weeks professionally, transitioning all my clients and projects. After that, I'd appreciate it if you'd direct any communication through Lisa. As I turned to leave, Lawrence found his voice. You know Jillian will be gone by the time your 2 weeks are up. You could stay. We could renegotiate your position, your salary. I paused at the door. This was never about Jillian, Lawrence. Not really. It was about a company culture that allowed her behavior to flourish, that values appearances over substance, that escorted out a loyal employee based on gossip and assumptions. I shrugged. Some things money can't fix. My 2 weeks at Brightline were surprisingly peaceful. Jillian was immediately transferred to Tacoma, effective that same day. People were awkwardly nice to me, perhaps worried I might fund their competitors next. I worked diligently, documenting everything, training others to take over my accounts. On my last day, Ricardo from design brought in cupcakes. For your new beginning, he said, giving me a genuine hug. And I'm sorry I didn't reach out during, I hugged him back. It's okay. We're good. Bailey cried when I told her about the scholarship. Why me? She asked. There are people who need it more. Because you've got incredible talent that deserves to be nurtured, I told her. And because you were kind to me when others weren't. My first day at Cascade Creative felt like stepping into sunshine after a long storm. Nadia greeted me with coffee in a mug that said New Beginnings, and introduced me to the team of 14 who all seemed genuinely happy to be there. As for the inheritance, it did finally come through, almost exactly 4 months after that fateful morning when Jillian held up my letter. I paid off my mom's medical bills, bought her a single-level house that would be easier for her to navigate, and set up the scholarship fund, which has now helped 7 women escape toxic workplaces while pursuing their education. I still work at Cascade. I could have retired, sure, bought an island somewhere and disappeared. But it turns out I actually love what I do when I'm doing it with people who value both the work and the humans who create it. The money changed my life, yes, but not in the ways people might expect. It gave me freedom, not from working, but from worrying. Not from responsibility, but from fear. I saw Jillian once, about a year later, at an industry conference. She looked tired, her smile strained as she networked aggressively with potential employers. I heard through the grapevine that she'd been let go from Brightline's Tacoma office after 6 months, something about fit issues. She spotted me across the room, hesitated, then deliberately turned away. I didn't follow. Some people never learn, and it's not my job to teach them. Last I heard, Lawrence took early retirement after Brightline was acquired by a larger agency. The new management apparently found some irregularities in how he'd been running things. Karma, working in mysterious ways. So, that's my story. From humiliation to vindication, from victim to, well, not victor exactly. Just someone who refused to let other people define her worth. Oh, and if you're wondering, yes, I did eventually print out another copy of that inheritance letter, but this time I used my home printer. Some lessons you only need to learn once. If you've ever had someone try to use your success or good fortune against you, drop a comment below. I read them all. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about life's unexpected turns and the satisfaction of standing your ground when it matters most. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well, on your own terms, without apology.